All right, so basically just to continue with natural colors, because that's kind of the goal of today, I did a brief introduction for those who have not worked with them before and give a bit of an overview from a regulatory standpoint and what's available. So just to summarize about us at IFC Solutions, we've been around since 1939. The original founder was one of the original creators of release agents for the baking industry. So the predecessor to PAM that you might use at home. And then in the 1950s, we got into food colors and ingredient blending. Our specialty is a more customer-focused approach that goes across the board for all of our lines. You know, a lot of things are not one size fits all. You know, people are always like, just give me the best of this. Well, the best for someone else might not be the best that works for you. Tell us a little bit about your product line. Tell us a bit about your process. It's not uncommon to sell two different products to the same company who has two different manufacturing plants making the exact same product. Just because one person has higher humidity or one person's at a higher elevation, there are so many things involved when selecting ingredients and processing aids. It helps to have someone who's willing to walk you through the process and customize for you. Outside of baking, we cater a lot of different industries, so we can't handle the confectionery space, meat and poultry for colors and release agents. We work with spice and flavor houses, work with beverages, cereal and extruded products, obviously baking, and then nutraceutical, personal care, cosmetics, and dairy. So again, in terms of our product lines, it's eclectic, but we're well versed in all of these. So food colors, again, FD&C, what's considered natural, mineral pigments, organic compliant and certified organic colors, and then offering them in unique formats that best suit your needs. So if you want powder, if you want a pre-dispersed or solubilized liquid, sometimes a paste is more preferred or a gel. And then we have color bits as well, which is a more unique product for the candy industry. We have our release agents. Again, highly customizable, prevent food products sticking to equipment. So if you're having issues with things not popping out of molds or getting stuck on conveyors or cutting equipment, we have solutions to help with that. Lecithins, similar to other emulsifiers, these are nice, clean label, natural or organic options. And then we offer them in liquid or powder versions. And then again, we have other natural and organic ingredients like glycerins, oils, things like that. So in terms of colors, a study found that when choosing food products, 40% of consumers preferred items made without artificial colors. So it's not the majority, but it is the growing population. The main thing to understand is there's a difference between two different segments of colors. So there is what's considered batch certified, which in the US would be our FD&C colors. These are also called synthetic colors. And these are ones derived from coal tar byproducts. These are very safe. Samples during manufacturing are actually sent to the FDA, or if you're in another country, to your regional government. Every sample is evaluated and then approved and given a certification number. That's why they are batch certified. You can't sell it as FD&C Blue 1 unless the government has given it the thumbs up. Now on the other side, you have colors that are not subject to batch certification. These are commonly referred to as natural colors, although technically there is no term called natural colors. You can have natural flavors, but the FDA doesn't actually recognize, and from a labeling standpoint, natural colors. So if you're using beet juice or curcumin and on your finished product label it says natural colors, technically incorrect, and the FDA could come after you for that. But basically in general, these are things that are coming from fruit juices, vegetable juices, spices, minerals, and even insects if you're using carmine. In terms of regulation, the natural colors, or just colors in general, are part of the 21 CFR section 73 subpart A. So if you're not familiar with the CFR, It's basically just all the regulatory guidelines by the FDA. And this particular section goes over all the ingredients that are approved that are not batch certified. So again, the natural colors for products. And it even goes over where each one can be used. So for instance, not all colors have been approved across the board. So beet juice can be used in any food as long as it's, in a GRAS level, generally recognized as safe. But spirulina has limitations. Really, the only limitations are not a health or safety concern. It's that no one really paid the money to do all the studies to get it approved by the FDA. So it doesn't mean it's not safe, it just means it hasn't been approved yet. So something to keep in mind for certain ingredients and colors. And again, approvals are not one size fits all. So you just want to make sure if you're using a color that it does meet your product definition. So for instance, if you're making an icing, make sure it's approved for icing. If you're making a baked product, make sure it's approved for baked product. Your color supplier should help you with this, but it's not uncommon for things to not get transferred in terms of information. So we often try to work with our customers to tell them what is the legal approach to colors. In that same vein, in terms of what's approved for what applications, because there are limitations, there are also opportunities. So for instance, in the US, so I know there's a lot of international people on the line, but basically in terms of the US, there's only one natural green approved on that CFR list that I mentioned, and that's sodium copper chlorophyllin. This is only approved. Someone only did the research and had it approved by the FDA for citrus-based dry beverage mixes. Chances are if you're in baking, you don't use that. You don't make that product, and therefore you can't really use it as a colorant. So what that means is you get someone like us to make a custom blend for you. The benefit is, sodium copper chlorophyllin only has one shade of green, and when we can take a blue and a yellow, we can make multiple shades of green. Different concentrations, a little bit yellower, a little bit more teal, a little bit more bluer. So that's one of the nice benefits. So this kind of gives you a rough outline of what types of ingredients you can see on that CFR list. This isn't everything, and it will vary country by country. But this just gives you a rough idea of what you might find. And these are really common things you might even already be consuming. Some of the more unique ones will be things like spirulina extract, which comes from algae. And then fruit juice is pretty common. Caramel is pretty common. So you're probably already using a lot of these anyway. Overall, these are kind of broken down into different types of products. So there are or I should say chemical types. So there's anthocyanins that would cover a lot of the vegetable juices and some of the fruit juices. These are most commonly red, purple, or blue. Now, earlier I mentioned about stability concerns, and this kind of goes into where each one has different sets of stability. So for anthocyanins, these are not considered pH stable. They will actually fluctuate shade depending on the pH they're in. So you might get a very bright red at a pH of 3, or when you move it into a dough that's more neutral, you'll get more of a blue or purple. So you got to make sure you're using the right option for your pH. Overall, though, these are very heat stable options, also very light stable. But if you're not in its preferred pH zone, they will have a tendency to fade quicker or shift color. Carotenoids, so these are things coming from carrots or tomatoes, things like that. Reds, yellows, oranges, very pH and heat stable, very light stable as well. They do oxidize a little bit more often than some of the other colorants, so they tend to have a shorter shelf life. And what I mean by that is, instead of a 12-month shelf life, they might only have like a 6 or a 9-month shelf life. And you can adjust this by adding antioxidants to your finished product, and that will help preserve that. But they're a great option. The only and the other thing that's really good with them is they're good for both oil and water-friendly applications. Betanins. These are found in beet juice extracts and beetroot. So for these, good pH stability overall. If you get below a low pH, around the 4s and less, they're going to start to have stability issues. But they have good light stability for the most part, but they're very bad in the heat stability. So a lot of people started using these in the beginning because they're very inexpensive, but when you put them into baking applications, they disappear. They might shift a little bit yellow or disappear altogether. So not ideal. Of the two, beetroot has more heat stability. Beet juice is more color concentration in terms of the betanin levels. But both will actually not be all that heat stable. So these are great for things like icings or frostings, things that go in on top of your applications. Curcumins are great, pH heat stable, but again, as I mentioned before, very poor light stability. So this is something to keep in mind. If you're going to use a nice bright lemon yellow, you might want to go with something that's a carotenoid versus a curcumin, because it will disappear throughout the week if it's under a bright display case. If it's going to be in an opaque package, don't worry about it. It's going to work great. It's going to last, between the making and the eating once it's at someone's home. But in terms of if you're putting it on display, something to let your color supplier be aware of is, I have clear packaging, or I am going under 24 hours of light. So make sure it's something that's light stable. Carmine, one of the oldest colorants used by humans, commonly used in lipsticks and makeup, but it's also approved in food. Very, very popular in most parts of the world outside of the US in baking. It's very heat stable, light stable, and pH stable. So it's one of the better, most color intensive natural colors. The only issue, which is why it's more focused in the US, is that it's not kosher or vegan. A lot of other countries don't put as much of a concern on kosher, so it's more commonly used in other areas. Algae, as I mentioned, blue spirulina, so that was one of the colors that was used on Richard's toppings, the icings. It's very nice, bright blue, has really good stability, needs to be, again, in a little higher pH range. So, anything from 5 to maybe 9 will be safe. Can withstand high heat, and will fade if you're in the lower pH. So again, a lot of things you got to balance. So it's really important to give as much information to your color supplier as possible when dealing with natural colors. It's not like, hey, I just need a blue, or I need this Pantone, send me what you got. It's really got to be, I need that Pantone. It's going into a baking application. The heat is going to be this. I'm baking it for this long. The pH is going to be XYZ. The more information, the shorter your R&D will be. That's kind of why we have to do a little more hand-holding on the natural color side, which makes it a lot less of a headache for you, and we're well versed in it, so it's not a problem for us. The last two options in these categories will be carbohydrates. So this is mostly going to be caramel, at least in the US. Other countries have other options as well, so there'll be activated carbon and things like that. This is basically anywhere where you've taken sugars or malt or something like that, and you've cooked it to get anything from like a dark yellow to almost a black. And these are great. There is some concern with regulatory right now with Prop 65 in California, and a lot of other states and countries are kind of going along with it. So caramel still the most dominant color probably used in baking, but it is getting some negative connotations, mostly just because people will read one bad thing that doesn't really translate across the board, but I'll kind of touch on that in the next slide. Lastly, vitamins and minerals. These are very stable. B12 is also known as riboflavin. It's a nice bright yellow. It has good stability. It's better than curcumin, but it does have some stability issues with light as well. So something to keep in mind. From the mineral side, TiO2 is the main white ingredient. So if you're looking to brighten anything or lighten anything, this is your go-to. Similar to caramel, this has some negative connotations. Both are very safe, but certain regions in the world have, France, for example, has banned TiO2 due to one study. Mica is more of a color for enhancement. So this will be a glittery pearl effect. Give it a more metallic look. You can have gold icing, silver icing. Very cool if you're doing like a specialty type of cake. So just to quickly to cover two main trends that we've seen. I mean, there's quite a few in the baking industry, but these are some of the more popular ones that we get a lot of requests for. So for caramel colors, I talked about Prop 65. So in California, there's basically a list for those who aren't familiar that goes over any ingredient, and that's not even just for food, any ingredient or product that may cause cancer. On that list is 4-MEI and furfuryl alcohol. Caramel itself is not on this list, but 4-MEI and furfuryl alcohol are byproducts when you cook any carbohydrate. So whether it's sugar, coffee, malt, all of these things are going to have these byproducts just by cooking them. So that means you will need a Prop 65 warning label on your product. And for the most part, it hasn't had too much blowback. A lot of companies have made sure to get caramel off their label just to protect themselves. But overall, you go into a Starbucks in California, there'll be a little plaque saying Prop 65, and no one really gives it the time of day. So it's not a huge change in the industry. I mean, like Pepsi and Coke are still selling out there. But for a lot of people who are formulating new products, they figure, why worry about the headache? Let me formulate from scratch with no caramel. And in that situation, they come to us and we'll make specialty blends. And the blends will just be all those natural colors I mentioned before, blended to get the right shade of brown. So again, we'll take, you need a yellow, you need a blue, you need a red, and that's how you'll get a brown. And depending on what you need, that's how we select those ingredients. So if you need it to be heat stable, that might be one type of blend. But if you only need it for icing, that might be a different type of blend. And we'll try to keep cost in mind so that we get it closer to that caramel point, which is relatively inexpensive. And then the other thing would be red velvet. Super popular color in terms of cakes. It actually has no set shade. So one of the interesting things is people will say, I want a natural red velvet color. Okay, well, what is your version of red velvet? Some people think of it as a very bright red. Some people think of it as more of a purpley red. We can accommodate both. We usually just need to know. The other thing to consider is that when chocolate is present, it also has an effect. So sometimes what happens is people will send us their mix and say, can you achieve this shade? That way we already know what your raw ingredients, your base, your uncolored base is, and then we'll color it accordingly to get you to that end result. And then we'll send everything back to you saying, here's your usage rate, here's our color, and then here's how you're going to get to that natural red velvet color. And again, it's just incorporating certain heat stable ingredients and then blending them accordingly so that you get the desired shade. So that's really it in terms of natural colors. I'm sure there's questions. If you ever need anything from IFC, samples or documentation, technical questions, you can reach out to us through these emails or our phone number. And that's basically it.